Hello and welcome to Henley Video Tutorials. I'm Claire Huangci, and today we're going to speak about Schumann's Piano Concerto in A minor, Opus 54. This is one of the most beautiful, most romantic concertos, and what's very unusual about it is that the piano and the orchestra play an equal role. So this is a piece where we will learn how to really listen to the orchestra and how to basically play chamber music on a bigger scale with orchestra. In the very beginning of this concerto, the opening for the piano, the opening entrance, is tricky in that we have to be ready on the spot, and we're coming in not on a downbeat. So the orchestra gives us the downbeat, and it's up to us to decide when to come in. I would always think later is better than too early because it sets the tone for our continuing chords. Would be an okay timing. After this, after the first sforzando, you can take a little bit of time to breathe, just to give yourself the impulse on the missing downbeat before continuing, and maybe to give yourself room to grow by making a small kind of swell, a crescendo, into the orchestra chords when they come in bar 3. These chords can always be played a little bit as if your hands are sliding, with the index fingers on each hand acting as an anchor. Think always one movement every 2 notes. When you have the sforzando chords in bar 3, take a moment to also breathe and be fully aware that the orchestra comes in broad and usually at a slower tempo, so be ready to really put on the brakes. After the beautiful first theme is being played by the orchestra in the woodwind section, I always see the next piano entrance as being an answer to the orchestra. It is absolutely romantic, but should never be overly sentimental. Keep the clear rhythm in mind. Always singing on the top voice. We can have a little bit of freedom here in those syncopation rhythms. However, the transition should be very smooth going into the new tempo so that the orchestra knows the tempo, what to play, the cello solo. There are a lot of places in this concerto where we really have to look to the orchestra for a very clear cue from the conductor. And one such place to pay attention to is in bar 59, when the orchestra comes in with a light pizzicato. This is a moment where the chord and the piano has to be exactly together with them. So it's an attention point. At bar 102, 103, the oboe gives the beautiful theme, and we answer more or less in the same dance-like rhythm, dance-like thinking. Don't change the tempo too much in this section. And when the theme is repeated, this time in C minor, you can take a little bit more time, and at D, bar 111, it's another moment where you have to pay close attention to the orchestra to be fully together and also give some extra weight in the right-hand line because we're playing against 8 woodwinds. In bar 132 and 133, this is later a technique which I will talk about how to practice. I group things a little bit different mentally so as to make the technical side of playing these octaves a little bit easier. When we look at it and we see the bar lines, automatically that's how we would accent it, or at least that's how we would think. But I always think of it as just being one beat extra. That way I can stay horizontal in one line rather than moving dun 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 bum. I can think da 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 dum. Of course, this is to be said You shouldn't give an accent wrongly because that would be confusing, but it's just a way for us to practice and to group mentally. In the whole development section, this is chamber music in the purest form. We're playing a lot of duets with different woodwinds, and it's up to us to transition very seamlessly from playing the theme and playing the accompaniment for the woodwinds. At bar 171, this is a place where the orchestration gets a little bit thicker, and we should calculate always a little bit extra time that they might need. At bar 185, it's a place of technical difficulty. So just like in the beginning, I recommend breathing to give us this impulse of the missing third beat of the bars, and then making a slight crescendo going into the downbeat, giving a very clear downbeat to the orchestra at bar 187 for them to know exactly when to come in. Going there. In bar 193 and also in the bar 195, this is very tricky, and I will play slowly so you can see my fingering. What I do is I bring out the top note, so the pinky in the right hand, in the very beginning. And then, for the last two notes, because I group them kind of in one movement, I make the emphasis now on the thumb for the first note, and then the ring finger for the second. So I'm already getting ready to make the turn as early as possible. In più animato, from bar 205, this is a place where technically it's difficult, yet we still have to plan for extremely long phrases. So how I would practice this is to focus a little bit on the left hand, since our right hand is being doubled by the orchestra. The left hand can have a very relaxed pinky, and using the thumb as an anchor, because we're constantly moving in this direction, almost imagine that your hand is turning itself all the time. And practicing like this quite slowly with left hand separate until you're able to play that like in your sleep. Now, planning the dynamic is a little bit trickier because the whole thing is repeated twice. So always know that you have to give more, and that means you have to start at a very piano and stay piano and make an extremely long crescendo. So starting from bar 205, we're making a very long crescendo all the way to the middle of bar 218. And only then we do a 10-bar decrescendo, always bearing in mind that starting bar 229, the whole thing is being repeated again. And this time, the crescendo should move to the bigger climax. So within the two climaxes, these crescendos, one is greater than the other, and the ultimate climax comes only in bar 245, followed by, again, a 10-bar decrescendo. Now we're at the cadenza of the first movement. The cadenza is built off a lot of melodic fragments. And it almost feels to me that Schumann is searching for something. So we can almost think of each fragment with its harmonies as having a different color from the others. Maybe it's getting more intense, but always full of fantasy. From bar 420, I will play slowly so you can see the fingering. But this is an area where I practice it, and I also always think in 2-bar phrases. Maybe one is having tension and one is having a little bit of relaxation. This is a place where one has to save their energy and also just the physical strength of playing. also think of the phrase as not following the bar lines. Finishing the phrase, followed by. This whole having a little breath in between the phrases can help a lot when we're playing and getting very excited on the stage, and it can help us save our energy a bit. From bar 446, each of these harmonies are growing in tension. Until we reach this heavenly chord. A last point I'd like to make in this movement is in bar 455. We're having this melodic fragment for the last time being reiterated by the left hand. And because this will become very relevant in the second movement, really take time to show us and to really ring out with the left hand. And there we have the first movement of the Schumann Concerto. And now we're continuing with the second movement of Schumann's Piano Concerto. This is a movement where, one, we, as the pianist, we should let ourselves be really inspired by the orchestra, because it's a movement where most of the time we are making the carpet of sound for them as a kind of accompaniment. Even the very beginning, when we play these first chords, we should somewhat match the orchestra. So we should listen for them after in the rehearsal and try to come with the same articulation. I don't think it should be too short, rather a nice portamento. And I always think of it almost like having a small tapering off, a very minor decrescendo, just in the articulation in our part. One thing to note is that there's a lot of transitions where the orchestra plays 2 bars and then we play the following 2. We should always have extra attention to the first note of what we're starting, just for acoustic reasons, making sure that people can hear it, especially when the line is being played alone by a single finger. For example, in bar 11. Making sure that that first note just has an extra ring to it. In bar 24, it's a moment where we definitely have to look to the conductor so that our second beat is together with the flute and the strings. They might take a little bit of extra time, so pay extra attention there. From bar 29, we begin a beautiful duo, and I almost feel that Schumann is making homage to his wife Clara Schumann's Piano Concerto, because in her Piano Concerto, also in A minor, the whole second movement was simply a duo for piano and cello. And this could be a little bit like that. So this is a place where we have to stay fully flexible and always listen for their line. In the section starting at bar 47, I would say to keep in mind that it's a place where the orchestra might take more rubato, might take more liberty. So definitely don't just think of it in a metronomic sense. Think of their theme, and even when you're practicing it, maybe hum the melody of the orchestra in your head. Starting at bar 90, where this movement is drawing to a close, and we have the following motive, which is being played continuously. Always with this little swell in the middle. And this motive, we can actually hear, has been taken from the cadenza in the first movement. So when we emphasize the left hand, it was a really nod to this movement. And Schumann, again, it feels to me like he's searching for something. So the orchestra is playing also the same thing. Very mysterious in character. And when the orchestra starts the motive at 103, of course, this is the same as what's coming up in the third movement, but also it is the first theme from the first movement. So it's a piece where Schumann uses the motives in all three movements, and it makes it really not movement for movement, but one complete story. At bar 104 and the following 106, again, give just an extra shine on the top B in the right hand. So it can almost sound a little bit like something magical is about to happen. And without further ado, it leads straight into the third movement of the piano concerto. Welcome to the third movement of Schumann's Piano Concerto. This movement is so much fun. It has a dance-like quality from the very beginning, and I find that there could be a tendency for us to forget where the bar line is because Schumann is shifting so many rhythms all the time. So when one is practicing it or preparing it, it is great to let loose and have a lot of flexibility with the rhythm, together with the orchestra, of course, but to always keep in the back of your mind fully aware where the one is lying, because one does need a certain amount of stability in playing this piece well. In the very beginning, I will play it slowly so you can see the fingering, which I use and can be applied later each time the theme comes back. It's really a question of these notes. Again, when playing this theme, I tend to take a little breath just to make sure that I'm not rushing into it too early. The very first tempo for this movement can be determined actually by playing either a bit from the development section, which is, or from the coda. And this rhythm will tell us how best to begin. And very often we might be surprised that actually that tempo is slower than one we would like to start with. And this would be a nice, comfortable tempo to continue the rest of the piece. In this movement, our role is more speaking than singing. I think what we're trying to hold as a melody is actually used through harmonic progressions. So think of each harmony change as being the melody rather than each note. In bar 147 and 148, this is one of those checkpoints after the first dance, taking a lot of flexibilities, for us to be completely together with the orchestra before starting the next section. Definitely take time not to rush. I will play the section a little bit slowly so you can see the fingering. It can be used also at the recapitulation. In the section from bar 174, this is a place where if we're thinking at every bar line is an accent. So we're playing. It's much more difficult. I think of it in wave motions. Mentally grouping it like this would make the whole thing technically easier to play. And that's not to say having an accent on the offbeat, but just to be aware of this new grouping. At bar 188, it's very important to give the orchestra a very strong impulse on the one for them to know exactly how to come in. This is a tricky place, so pay special attention on how you're executing the downward arpeggio. And starting at bar 286, it's very tricky for the orchestra to come in exactly. And while for us, we're playing continuously, it's a bit easier, it makes sense when we're practicing to either sing the orchestra or hum it, the rhythm at least, to be fully aware of what they are playing. There's a lot of harmonic development in this section. I will play slowly from bar 306 so you can see the fingering, which can later be applied in the same section in the recapitulation. Just another little tip. From bar 335, the orchestra is coming off beat and they're coming in with a small accent. So be fully aware, and again, check out the orchestra part to make sure that you're not confused with all the rhythmic fluctuations. Another little tip from bar 481, this is the next 4 bars. It's a bit tricky because the orchestra is playing 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, and we're playing like almost like a hemiola. So when we practice, we could also practice. It's very hard to be completely together on the downbeat at bar 485 with the orchestra, so let's try it a different way. I will play slowly now, a few bars after this to show the fingering. At the coda, this has to sound like side-to-side motion, almost always in 2-bar phrases. There's always a kind of checkpoint with the orchestra at the hemiola at around bar 778. We have to be exactly together with them on beats 2 and 3. At bar 843, I actually play it a little bit differently. I execute it differently, and I'll show you. I will also play a little bit slowly from bar 883 to show the fingering. The most important moment for me is the moment of the turn before each chord. So be fully prepared to make that turn early. So if you're starting before the chord, it's already too late. It's almost on the very last note, already in your mind, shift your hand position. From bar 911, for about the next 12 bars, we find like a little sound island where after all the exciting things that are happening in this coda, we should take a little bit of time and almost show a different color, something, the calm in a storm, so to say. From bar 959, I always take a little bit of time because the sound's just so expansive and broad just from the theme. And then the orchestra comes in full tutti, and together they'd also like to be a little broader. And we would then celebrate a very big ending together, starting in bar 971, almost with a final push to the end. This work is a lot of fun for us, also for the orchestra because they play such an equal partner to us, and yes, being contagious for the audience as well. So I wish you have great enjoyment working on this piece. Thanks for listening. I hope some of the tips were helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time.